Hi, I'm Dr. Montagna, and we're continuing this series on Lyme disease here with complicating factors. First of all bacteria, they make ammonia when they digest proteins. When that's out in the soil, that's a great thing. That's part of the nitrogen cycle. But when it's inside of us, it's not so good of a thing because we don't process ammonia very well. Ammonia is supposed to be processed through the urea cycle. It's supposed to come in through the citric acid cycle and in the urea cycle. Ammonia gets converted into urea, that gets in the urine, and we excrete that out into the toilet. That's if the ammonia is in some place where the circulation can sweep it away. But when it can't, it just stays there. And one of the problems with that is that ammonia starts to burn your mitochondria. Your mitochondria is the little organelles inside of your cells that make energy. So once you start to get an effective process like Lyme disease, where you have bacteria all over the place feeding off your proteins, they're making ammonia wherever they are at. That's going to burn the mitochondria out of the local nearby cells from wherever they are, make those really weak, and that's part of the reason why people get real sick, because they can't make the energy to heal themselves up. This is a rendition of what a mitochondria looks like, and in all those folds, that's where we actually make something called ATP, which is what we get all of our energy out of. This is an electron micrograph picture of a dying mitochondria. Don't know what the cause, but it's atrophied. It's not nearly as long. One end is starting to lose its definition and starting to waste away. That happens inside of us, we're in a lot of trouble because we can't make the energy to heal up. This lets us see that this is your typically a cycle of glycolysis, how we make energy inside of ourselves. Almost all the energy is inside the purple, which is where our mitochondria are. Some other risk factors for complications or other complications that go on, the risk of yeast infections or candida infections. There are several different things that predispose us to yeast infections. One of those is broad-spectrum antibiotics, which is absolutely prescribed for Lyme disease issues. Damage to the intestinal mucosa, the lining of the gut, that can happen because of the antibiotics can actually injure the lining of the gut, and the rickettsial infections can damage the lining of the gut. The inflammatory changes that go on can damage the lining of the gut. Chronic steroid therapies, just the stress of dealing with chronic disease is enough to start to damage the gut. 24 hours of some or long-standing stress can change the entire environment of the intestinal wall in 24 hours. This is a picture of what a real severe yeast infection looks like. Yeasts have 4 different forms. There's a yeast, mold, fungus, and fungal parasite inside of any kind of a host. And each one of those can greatly increase the complication factor. If it's just yeast itself, it's not that bad. But if it starts to turn into the other forms, and we're starting to get in a lot of trouble. We'll see why in a little bit. This is what the lining of the gut's supposed to look like. These are called microvilli. They just look like little fingers sticking up. And those normally stick up fairly high, and bacterial coating called the flora coats in between those, and it's between the flora and the microvilli where you get all our digestion to occur. Once there's a chronic inflammatory issue that goes on, those microvilli, they start to change. They'll get a little fatter, a little squatter, taller and thinner. Pretty soon they just wither back down to the base. But the base of the intestinal lining can become 2-3 times thicker than what it normally is, and it's filled with all kinds of inflammatory issues, which makes it so it leaks like a sieve and it really doesn't absorb very well. This is what it looks like under a microscope. The one on the left is what a normal microvilli look like. The one on the right is from chronic inflammatory responses, just destroying it. This is a picture of a fungal body with its feeding tubules coming out. Those feeding tubules are called mycelia. Mycelia are what mushrooms grow off of, any fungal body that's out there. They look soft and they look harmless, but the mycelia are actually made up of something called chitin. Chitin is what makes up the outside shell of most of our bugs, things like beetles, crickets, grasshoppers, things like that. Well, chitin poses a real serious problem to our immune system because it blocks our immune system. Our immune system can't do anything with chitin, so it can go wherever it wants. And that starts to increase the normal permeability, or starts making the gut leak, essentially. That'll start to overwhelm the liver. Liver is where we deal with all our toxins. This is showing where all the circulation from the gut comes back to the liver. The liver has several important jobs. It's supposed to catch and destroy the bacteria and the pathogens that come off of the gut. It's supposed to store all your food sources to some extent. Make sugar from protein when you're stressed out. It's supposed to clear the body of toxins and make bile so you can digest fats. The liver does its detoxification in two phases. One's phase 1, that's mostly the cytochrome P450 phase. And we have the same thing going on inside of our gut. That's how we absorb our nutrients through that also, but that system also deals with foreign chemicals inside of our body. Now, those foreign chemicals can come in through our food supply. We can make them because of maldigestive issues. There are several different ways where those can occur. Some of that will be dealt with inside of the gut. Some of that will be dealt with inside of the liver. This is what a microscopic view of a chronic inflamed gut looks like. These little bumps in here, these are the microvilli that have atrophied down to make a really thick base, and the tops of the microvilli are actually blowing up. They're falling apart. The lining of the gut, by the way, is only one cell layer thick, so you don't have a big protective layer in any of this. One cell layer, and you break that cell layer and you start to have a lot of problems. So when you have a chronic long-standing yeast infection from long-standing antibiotic therapies, actually doesn't have to be long-standing antibiotic therapy with some of the really potent antibiotics that are out there. It really starts to wreak havoc a lot. Once the gut starts to leak, and the physiology inside the gut starts to change, the flora starts to change from pathogenic issues because the antibiotics start to kill off the healthful bacteria that's in there, so all the pathogenic stuff can start to grow fairly rampantly. Well, parts of the cell walls of the bacteria are made up of lipopolysaccharides. Those are called LPSs. Fragments of those start to get into the bloodstream, and they start to make the gut leak. As soon as the gut leaks, the LPS gets out in the bloodstream. That starts to make the blood-brain barrier leak also. And part of the reason why Lyme people get so much brain fog has to do with a leaky gut and a leaky brain, along with infection in the brain, ammonia going on in the brain. It's a plethora of issues that go on with that. The LPS also act as superantigens. That starts to turn on your immune system, and the immune system starts to create autoimmunity issues through these superantigens coming through a leaking gut. This is a big picture of a rendition of what a leaky gut looks like. Every one of those cells that looks like somebody has a butch haircut on it, those are the cells where the lining of the gut is. Most of those are supposed to be really close together, so the only way anything can get through there is through the cells. When chronic inflammation, that'll start to break those bonds in between the cells. They're called tight junctions, and create big things that shouldn't get through can get through on those. Well, we have the same type of tight junctions in our brain. When one leaks, it causes the other one to leak. So if the one in the brain starts to leak, it causes the one in the gut to leak. If the one in the gut starts to leak, it causes the one in the brain to leak. With all that, we can take a fresh look at the Herxmeyer reactions. Those are actually endotoxins being released and overwhelming the liver. Most of the time this can be from a endotoxicity inside of the gut because of a microbiota or a flora problem that's going on in there. When that happens, it's commonly full of yeast along with other pathogens that are going on in there. When that starts to release the endotoxins right in here, we start to get the Herxmeyer reactions. It's not a reinfection like people are told. So that'll really start to overwhelm the liver in a really huge way. And once that happens, the liver can't deal with all the toxins. Once it can't deal with all the toxins, it starts to spill out in the blood supply, get into the rest of the body. Well, along with that, at the same time all that's going on, as the gut starts to leak, it starts to let whole proteins into the blood. Those whole proteins will be some of the foods, where that starts to create food intolerances and food allergies. Well, those food allergies can have a huge impact in the brain. It affects the blood flow in the brain for one, and it really affects the psychological patterns up in the brain also. It can be the food allergy has a direct relationship with brain function and psychological disorders. So say yeast infections starting to go on, then somebody gets on some antifungals. Well, antifungals are been known to be some of the strongest toxins there are for the liver to start to try and have to deal with, and it starts to poison the liver with toxicity. And you look at this and you start to go, well, how long should we let this insanity go? How long are we going to keep all this stuff up? When we look at insanity, it's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, these results and these therapies have been going on since '86 without not much changes. That's another reason why we really need a different model to look at things. From a natural side, we've come up with some pretty significant different models where we can avoid all of this stuff. And it's really wonderful to see people with really disabled conditions get back to full, healthy, vibrant lives. So if you like the video, hit the like down below, subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with more videos later.